I came back from a weekend fishing trip expecting the peaceful view of my empty gravel lot beside the barn, but instead, I found a massive white RV squatting there like a bloated tick. There were lawn chairs out, laundry drying on a line tied to my fence, and a pink flamingo stabbed into the dirt like it claimed the land. I stood frozen for a moment, just absorbing the sheer audacity. Then the door swung open and out stepped Karen, wearing a wide-brimmed sun hat and holding a drink in a mason jar like she was the queen of someone else's backyard. She looked at me, waved casually, and said, "Oh good, you're back. I was worried you'd miss my yoga brunch." That's when I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was an invasion. And I wasn't just going to get mad. I was going to get even. The strange part was that Karen and I hadn't interacted much before this. I knew her in that distant neighborhood way, heard her yelling at UPS drivers, saw her putting flyers in mailboxes about unauthorized paint colors, the usual HOA hall monitor antic. But we didn't even live in the same development. My property sat just outside the HOA line. That's what made this whole situation even more ridiculous. She didn't even have jurisdiction here, and yet she planted her rolling monstrosity right on my lot like she was the queen of Entitlement Island. At first, I gave her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe she parked here in an emergency. So I walked up, trying not to look as annoyed as I felt, and asked if she needed help or if something had gone wrong. She didn't even let me finish the sentence. She waved her hand like I was background noise and said she had a verbal agreement with the neighborhood association to use the space temporarily. I blinked. What association? I was the only owner of this land. There was no association, and even if there were, they had no say here. I told her plainly that this was my land, not a communal RV park, and she'd need to move it immediately. That's when she smiled. It wasn't the polite kind of smile. It was the smug kind you see when someone thinks they've won before the game even started. She sipped her drink and said, "Well, you weren't using it anyway, and I figured you wouldn't mind." Then she turned around and went back into the RV. That was it. No apology. No intention of moving. Just full Karen mode confidence and the rustling of wind chimes hanging from her awning. I stood there in disbelief for at least a minute. Then I walked around the RV to inspect the damage. She had driven over the gravel, crushed my new saplings, and even cracked one of the concrete borders near the field. There were tire ruts in the grass that led all the way to the back gate, which she had unlocked herself. I later found a note taped to it that read, "Needed access. Hope that's okay. K." Spoiler alert, it was not okay. By the next morning, things had escalated. Not only had she set up more outdoor furniture, but there were now tiki torches, a Bluetooth speaker blasting soft jazz, and what looked like a composting toilet in the corner. She was turning my land into her own RV glamping ground. The final straw was when I spotted two strangers stepping out of the RV holding towels. I stopped them and asked who they were. They looked confused and said they had rented the RV experience for 2 nights on some booking site. I nearly choked. Karen had put the RV on vacation rental websites and was charging people to stay on my property. When I confronted her again, she acted as though I was being dramatic. She said I should be thanking her for bringing life to the land. I asked her how she thought she had the right to turn my property into a rental spot, and she said, dead serious, that unused land was a wasted resource, and she was doing the community a favor. I told her in no uncertain terms to move the RV before I called the police. She gave a little shrug and said, "You can try, but I've got renters booked through the weekend." Then she went inside and shut the door. I heard the locks click, so I did call the sheriff. An officer came out later that afternoon. He looked at the setup, looked at me, and then knocked on the RV door. Karen came out all smiles, offered him a lemonade, and said we were having a neighborly disagreement. She had all sorts of half-baked paperwork claiming she had permission to temporarily utilize adjacent land. The officer asked me if I had a formal trespass notice served. I hadn't, because I didn't expect to need one against a neighbor. He sighed and said unless it escalated or I filed something official, it was a civil matter. The next few days were miserable. People came and went like it was a motel. Karen installed a portable generator which roared all night long. Her dog barked constantly. Someone left beer cans in my rose bushes. And through it all, Karen pranced around the field like she was hosting a resort launch party. I began documenting everything. Every visitor, every piece of trash, every dollar she was raking in. I took photos, videos, and even pulled satellite images from drone footage I used for work. I compiled it all in a file titled Karen's RV Crime Scene. Then came the sign. One afternoon I came out and found she had spray-painted the side of the RV with "Private Property. Do not tow" in big red letters. It was my land, but her RV now claimed territorial dominance. That same day, I noticed she had run a hose from my barn spigot to her RV's water tank. She was using my water, without permission, without payment, and without shame. At that moment I didn't yell. I didn't call the sheriff again. I didn't even knock on her door. I just stood there, smiling. Because I knew what I was going to do. This wasn't just about getting rid of Karen. This was about teaching her, and anyone like her, that stealing someone's space comes with a price. A chilling, unforgettable, hilarious price. She thought she was safe because she made things complicated with legal loopholes and smug excuses. But I had something better than a sheriff's badge or a fine. I had creativity, resources, and a deep, burning desire for poetic justice. You see, I didn't just want her gone. I wanted her famous, infamous, even. So I pulled open the doors to my barn, stared at the dusty boxes marked Halloween props, animatronics, fog machines, and motion sensors, and smiled wider than I had in weeks. Karen had parked her RV on the wrong man's land, and she had just volunteered it to become the scariest, wildest, most satisfying revenge attraction the county had ever seen. The haunted nightmare on 4 wheels was about to be born. And Karen? She was about to be its unwilling mascot. The morning after Karen told me to enjoy her RV ambience, I stood in my garage drinking lukewarm coffee and staring at a stack of unopened Halloween crates. I had nearly forgotten they were there, packed tight from my days as a prop designer and haunted house enthusiast. Animatronic arms, motion-triggered scream boxes, a fog machine from a college theater set, and even a half-working voice modulator from my failed attempt to do haunted hayrides back in 2015. I wasn't looking at junk anymore. I was looking at tools. If Karen wanted to pretend she owned my land, then fine, she could own something. But it wouldn't be just an RV anymore. It would be a full-blown rolling house of horror. She parked it. I was going to haunt it. I started with research. I pulled out the legal paperwork I'd filed when she refused to move the RV and realized something important. She hadn't responded to the property lien notice I posted 2 weeks ago, and that meant I could escalate the process. With the help of a friend in property law, I filed for ownership under a legal doctrine that applies to unclaimed or improperly stored property after notice has been served. I even had photos of her handwritten, "Do not tow" sign as part of the case file. As ridiculous as it sounded, this was happening. I mailed one more formal notice, gave it the legally required waiting period, and meanwhile kept documenting every illegal rental, every stranger stepping foot on my land, and every moment she was caught using my utilities without permission. Karen thought she was safe hiding behind confusion and laziness. What she didn't realize was I was a detail guy. And detail guys win quiet wars. While the legal side churned through its due process, I got to work on the RV itself. At first, I just wanted to mess with her. I placed a Bluetooth speaker underneath the RV and, using my phone, triggered a low growling sound just after sunset. Then I set up motion-activated cackling coming from a bush nearby. Karen stormed out in pajama pants, yelling into the darkness, but no one was there. The next morning, she stomped over to my porch and accused me of harassment. I smiled and said the wind must have caught something. She scowled and said she would investigate. Perfect. Let her wander through her own paranoia. Once the final legal deadline passed and the court gave me temporary possession pending full transfer, I posted the document on her RV door with a bright red sticker that read, "Notice of Transfer Unauthorized Vehicle." Karen lost it. She screamed about stolen property and waved her phone at me while live-streaming to 3 people who couldn't stop laughing in the comments. But she couldn't stop it. I wasn't removing her RV, I was repurposing it. The moment she refused to move it, and the moment she missed her court date, she basically gift-wrapped the thing for me. The judge's signature said it all. I owned the RV, and I was going to give it the horrifying makeover it so desperately deserved. I waited until she packed up and left for one of her ridiculous book club brunches and moved in fast. The moment her SUV left the gravel road, I backed my truck up to the RV, opened its doors, and got to work. My friends from the community theater showed up with their toolkit of foggers, lights, battery-powered props, and a sick sense of humor. We stripped the interior of all her fake farmhouse pillows and mini cacti, replacing them with flickering red bulbs, velvet curtains, peeling wallpaper, and creepy family portraits with eyes that followed you. We mounted one of my old haunted mannequins inside the shower, rigged to fall forward when someone opened the curtain. A motion sensor above the main hallway triggered whispers from hidden speakers. I even installed a fake breaker panel that popped open to reveal what looked like a beating heart in a glass case. Every inch of that RV was going to make people scream and laugh. We ran tests that night and found a few technical bugs. One fog vent was pushing mist straight into the wrong vent, and a speaker had a short. But within 3 days, everything was perfect. I wrapped the RV exterior in a temporary vinyl that made it look like a haunted asylum on wheels. Painted windows, faux blood splatters, and the words, "Do not enter," scrawled like they were scratched in from inside. I added flashing red lights and a faint low-frequency hum to give it an uneasy feel even from a distance. The local fairgrounds gave me permission to set up during their weekend event, and I paid the booth fee in advance. The haunted camper had a name now, The Curse of Karen's Camper, and I made sure it was printed in massive letters across the back with the tagline, "You may enter, but she'll never leave." The first night was a hit. People screamed, laughed, and came out the exit shaking their heads in disbelief. I watched as parents filmed their teens jumping out of the RV, stumbling with wide eyes and breathless giggles. It wasn't just a haunted house, it was a revenge story come to life. I had placed a display board outside explaining that the RV was once parked illegally on private land, and that instead of calling a tow truck, the landowner had chosen to haunt it. The QR code on the board linked to a photo album showing the real before and after. People ate it up. Some asked if the Karen was real. I told them yes. Others asked if she'd seen it yet. I told them that too, yes. And she was not thrilled. Sure enough, on night 2, Karen showed up. She marched across the fairgrounds in wedge sandals and a floppy hat, yelling into her phone, recording herself ranting about stolen property, corrupted youth, and how she was the true victim. As she reached the RV, one of the animatronic Karens popped out of a side panel and screamed, "This isn't your driveway!" right in sync with her yelling. The crowd burst into laughter. Karen's face turned scarlet. She lunged forward, tried to slap the animatronic, and when it didn't react, she screamed that it was defaming her. Security asked her to leave. She refused. She stood in front of the RV with her arms out like she was making a last stand in a war movie, only instead of bombs falling, it was candy wrappers and giggles. The next day, she posted a now infamous video where she claimed I had destroyed her home and mocked suburban women everywhere. She said I was an agent of cultural collapse, and that turning her RV into a haunted house was equivalent to psychological warfare. The video was picked up by parody accounts almost instantly. One of them added dramatic music and slow zooms to her angry expressions. Another superimposed bats flying out of her mouth. It had over 500,000 views by the end of the day. Karen's meltdown had become part of the show. and no matter how loudly she protested, every new video only fueled the fire. I didn't need to defend myself anymore. The public had taken over. Her own behavior had written the story better than I ever could. All I did was add lights and sound effects. The final legal title came through 2 weeks later, officially signing over the RV to me. It wasn't just mine in spirit now, it was mine on paper. I added a gold-framed certificate near the RV's entrance reading, "Certified Nightmare Property, transferred by court order." Karen sent one last cease and desist letter. My lawyer sent back a photo of the Karen's reaction to seeing her beloved RV transformed into a traveling haunted house was everything I hoped for and more. The first time she saw it, she stood at the edge of the county fairgrounds in total disbelief, her mouth hanging open as families lined up around the block to enter what was now known as the Curse of Karen's Camper. She looked like she'd just seen a ghost, which was ironic considering the fog machine was hissing and a giant animatronic Karen popped out of the RV's side door every few minutes shrieking, "This is against HOA policy." Her expression turned from shock to fury as she realized what I'd done. I had turned her crime of entitlement into a full-blown public attraction, and now she was the star of the horror show. It didn't take long for her to storm up to the makeshift ticket booth, where I was helping a group of teenagers sign the waiver. She pointed a trembling finger at me and barked something about stolen property and defamation. I calmly reminded her that she had lost legal ownership weeks ago and offered her a complimentary ticket to walk through her own nightmare. That only made it worse. She called me a thief, a fraud, and a menace to the community before being asked to leave by security. But that wasn't the last I would see of her. Karen didn't just walk away and sulk in defeat. Oh no, she came back the next evening wearing a hoodie and sunglasses like a poorly disguised villain from a bad sitcom. She tried to hand out flyers accusing me of theft and vandalism to fairgoers. Most people laughed, some asked for selfies with her, and one teenager handed her a coupon for free popcorn. She was losing her grip. I could see it in her eyes. The more people enjoyed the haunted RV, the more it seemed to chip away at the image she held of herself as the bossy queen bee of the neighborhood. What truly pushed her over the edge, though, was seeing her face on merchandise. Kids wore Karen Camper Survivor t-shirts and waved glow-in-the-dark keychains that lit up when you screamed into them. I had even printed bumper stickers that read, "Don't park like Karen," with a cartoon image of the RV stuck in mud. She hated it all. Then came her act of desperation. Late one night, after the fair had closed and most people had gone home, Karen snuck onto the ground. She thought no one would notice. Unfortunately for her, the RV was rigged with motion sensors and surveillance cameras because I didn't put thousands of dollars into that build without securing it like Fort Knox. She climbed into the RV through one of the back windows, probably thinking she could destroy the inside or reclaim some personal items. Instead, she triggered every single sound and lighting effect inside the haunted attraction at once. Strobe lights flashed, speakers screamed, a dummy zombie lunged forward with a screeching growl, and fog filled the small interior in seconds. Karen panicked and tried to flee but got herself stuck in a narrow corridor rigged with moving walls and rubber snake. By the time security found her, she was screaming in a crouched ball next to a motion-activated clown mannequin with glowing eyes. She was escorted off the premises again, this time with police involvement. I didn't press charges, but I made sure the footage went straight to the internet. It racked up over 1 million views in 3 days. Naturally, Karen wasn't going down quietly. She filed a civil suit the very next week. She claimed emotional distress, defamation of character, and illegal use of personal property. My lawyer, who had become quite invested in the saga, prepared a brutal counterattack. He presented every legal document from the lien I filed to the court's default judgment when Karen failed to respond. He also played clips from her earlier interviews where she claimed the RV was just parked temporarily and not that important. The judge wasn't impressed. In fact, he looked irritated by the entire ordeal and dismissed the case with prejudice, meaning Karen couldn't try again. He even added a line in the record stating, "This is a textbook example of consequences for entitled behavior." Karen stormed out of the courtroom, her face redder than a tomato in the Arizona sun. But she wasn't finished. Not yet. She began following the haunted RV from location to location, standing outside venues with homemade protest signs that read, "My RV was stolen, and entitlement is a lie." Irony clearly wasn't her strong suit. She once showed up dressed like a ghost to scare customers away, but all she did was cause more excitement. A group of teenagers asked if she was part of the show and tipped her $5. Another group posed for pictures with her and called her Karen the Spectre. One dad even asked if she would sign his daughter's t-shirt. She ran away crying, but not before yelling that everyone was insane. She wasn't wrong. We were all a little insane for loving the chaos, but it was glorious. As the haunted RV gained more attention, I started getting offers. One came from a traveling carnival that wanted to feature the RV as a main attraction. They offered a lucrative deal, provided I kept the original story intact. In their words, "People love real villains. And she's the realest one we've seen." I signed the deal, and within 2 weeks the RV was rolling through different states, drawing thousands at each stop. We added new effects, including an animatronic Karen that popped out from a fake window yelling about zoning violations. There was even a segment where guests had to escape a mock HOA board meeting before being fined for imaginary offenses like using decorative mulch. Meanwhile, Karen tried to file for a restraining order claiming the RV's existence was harassment. The judge denied it, noting that she no longer owned it and that public interest couldn't be suppressed just because it embarrassed her. She once tried to show up and slash the RV's tires, but security cameras caught her in the act, and police issued her a warning. Her reputation was tanking. Even her old HOA cronies started distancing themselves, worried about liability or being associated with the mess. Karen had become a symbol, not of community values, but of entitled collapse. She once tried to rent a booth at a local crafts fair, and people lined up not to buy her stuff but to ask about the RV. Just when I thought things couldn't get more ridiculous, I received a letter from a film studio. They wanted to buy the rights to the story. They envisioned a dark comedy horror hybrid about a woman who loses her grip on reality after parking illegally and ends up haunting her own RV. I laughed so hard reading the pitch I nearly spilled my coffee. They were offering decent money and full creative control. I said yes on one condition, that Karen couldn't sue for likeness rights. My lawyer added a clause and sent it through. Just like that, Karen's camper was heading to the big screen. She wouldn't get a dime, but her story would live forever. It was poetic, really. She parked that RV thinking it was her right, thinking no one would stop her, that her excuses and audacity would shield her. But in the end, it became her legacy, a traveling haunted house where people laughed, screamed, and celebrated one man's revenge on the queen of entitlement. Karen had wanted to make my lot her kingdom. Instead, I turned her castle on wheels into a rolling nightmare. And I wasn't done yet. I had plans. Big ones. Karen had just given me my first ride. Now it was time to expand the fleet. The first thing I noticed as the haunted RV tour gained traction across the country was that the name Karen wasn't just a local punchline anymore. It had become a full-on brand. The phrase, "Don't park like Karen," showed up on bumper stickers in cities I'd never even been to. Halloween stores started carrying cheap knockoff versions of the animatronic Karen prop, complete with screaming sound effects and a plastic HOA violation clipboard. Every time I opened social media, there was a new meme or reaction video from someone who had just gone through the curse of Karen's camper. Some laughed, some screamed, a few even cried, but the one consistent thing was that people were obsessed. I couldn't keep up with the demand. That's when the idea hit me. This wasn't just revenge anymore. This was a franchise in the making. And if Karen had unknowingly gifted me her RV, Then she'd also just handed me the blueprints to a nightmare empire. The expansion started small. A local prop builder I'd worked with in the past called and offered to help construct a second RV haunted house using one of his old vehicles. We retrofitted it with better hydraulic systems, digital soundboards, and new rooms like Karen's Kitchen of Condemnation, where malfunctioning blenders and screeching fire alarms trapped guests in panic. I reached out to local theater students and paid them to act as HOA zombies and dramatic suburban neighbors. Each actor had scripted lines like, "That lawn gnome isn't code compliant," and "You left your trash bins out for 7 minutes too long." People were eating it up. Some even returned to go through the attraction again just to hear new lines and experience updated prop. We added new locations, rented parking lots in towns all over the state, and by the third month of the tour, we were booking 6 weeks in advance. Meanwhile, Karen had fallen strangely silent. No protests, no dramatic appearances, no flyers accusing me of stealing her legacy. I didn't trust it. It felt too calm. And sure enough, just when I let my guard down, she returned, this time in disguise. At a popular stop near a lakeside town, one of my staff noticed a woman with oversized sunglasses, a hoodie, and a clipboard pretending to take surveys outside the line. She was asking guests if they found the show offensive or if they felt it promoted hate against the suburban female demographic. We didn't engage her. We just filmed it and added her questions to a parody scene inside the attraction. That week we debuted a new prop, a Karen lookalike holding a clipboard, standing outside a mock RV window, muttering passive-aggressive lines like, "I just think it's interesting." The guests loved it. Karen, on the other hand, filed a formal complaint with the event center, which was promptly ignored because she had no connection to the property. And thus, her return only fueled the fire. The next big break came in the form of a merchandise deal. A company that specialized in novelty items and theme park souvenirs reached out with a licensing offer. They wanted to produce plush dolls of Screaming Karen, bobbleheads, and even a board game where players had to survive an HOA meeting without getting fined. The deal included royalties, and for the first time in years, I saw a legitimate business forming around what started as a petty revenge project. I consulted with a business advisor, formed an LLC, and even brought on 2 full-time employees to help manage bookings, logistics, and inventory. Every time I walked past the original RV, now carefully maintained and preserved like a horror museum exhibit, I couldn't help but laugh at how far things had come. Karen had tried to use my land for free. I had turned her entitlement into a national tour. But just as everything seemed to be stabilizing, Karen made one final desperate move. She hired an influencer lawyer, one of those loudmouths who markets themselves on social media and rants about cancel culture and free speech. Together, they launched a Karen defense campaign online, claiming she was the victim of public shaming and exploitation. They posted a dramatic video of Karen sitting in a garden chair, trying to look sad, talking about how her life was stolen by a man with too much time and too much money. She even claimed emotional trauma and said she had been harassed in grocery stores. Comments were divided. Some people supported her. Others roasted her into oblivion. Memes exploded overnight. Emotional trauma? From her own RV. Read one post with over 300,000 likes. A parody account was created within hours, posting daily clips of Karen lookalikes giving HOA-style citations to random objects like ducks, stop signs, and inflatable pool toys. Naturally, her legal team threatened to sue again. My attorney didn't even flinch. He filed a countersuit preemptively, citing defamation, attempted interference with business contracts, and misuse of media platforms. Then we released a statement through our company account that included all the court documents from the original case, timestamps from the lien, images of her illegally using my water hookup, and screenshots of her own booking page where she rented the RV to strangers. The public reaction was swift and brutal. Her legal campaign flopped. Her lawyer disappeared from the news cycle. And Karen? She vanished again. Only this time, for good. With Karen seemingly out of the picture, I focused on solidifying the future. We opened talks with a haunted theme park about bringing in a permanent attraction modeled after the RV but expanded into a full, suburban nightmare maze. Each section featured over-the-top parodies of HOA meetings, neighborhood squabbles, and passive-aggressive neighbor wars. One room was themed like a gated community gatehouse where animatronic Karens yelled at guests for not waving while driving. The sound effects included barking dogs, leaf blowers, and judgmental sighs. It was absurd, hilarious, and surprisingly effective at drawing crowds. By the end of the season, we had sold out every weekend and had standing invitations to return the next year. One of the most unexpected surprises came from an HOA board member from a nearby county who reached out privately. He told me Karen had once tried to have him removed from his position over a flowerbed dispute. He thought the whole RV saga was poetic justice. He even donated funds to help create a second attraction called HOA House of Horrors, a walk-through maze styled like a suburban neighborhood from hell. Each section had themed jump scares, like a lawn violation monster or a mailbox that screamed when touched. We included a hall of mirrors that resembled a homeowner's nightmare of escalating fines. Guests left laughing, terrified, and slightly traumatized. Exactly the vibe we wanted. As everything grew, I made sure to keep the original RV exactly as it was when Karen lost it. We added a protective covering and started calling it the Cursed Original. Guests could view it like a museum piece. People took selfies in front of it, some even bowed to it like it was a holy relic of vengeance. We held an annual Karen Fest, where fans dressed up as their favorite HOA villain and reenacted famous lines from the attraction. A costume contest was held. The prize was a ride in the RV with fog machines on full blast. It became an event people planned vacations around. The final chapter of this saga didn't begin with some grand announcement or another viral video. It began on a quiet, foggy morning at one of our most popular locations, a repurposed drive-in theater we had turned into a full haunted carnival experience. The RV sat proudly in the center of it all, glowing with eerie red lights and playing distant loops of screaming Karens shouting about recycling bins and property lines. It was just past sunrise, and I had come early to prep for a private event when I noticed something strange on the surveillance monitor. One of the exterior cameras had been disconnected. My stomach sank. We'd had our share of minor vandalism before, kids trying to sneak in or pranksters yanking props, but something about this felt deliberate. I walked the perimeter, and that's when I saw the figure crouched behind a generator, fiddling with one of the power boxes. Hoodie up, bag slung over one shoulder, and just enough tension in the air to tell me this wasn't some random intruder. It was Karen. Again. I almost couldn't believe it. After all her failed attempts, lawsuits, and online embarrassment, she was still trying. But this time, she wasn't armed with legal threats or passive-aggressive note. She had tools in her hands. I shouted, and she looked up, eyes wild, mouth twisted in that same self-righteous fury I'd come to recognize. She screamed something incoherent, then lunged for the nearest cable and tried to yank it out of the box. Bad idea. That particular connection powered one of our rigged scare circuits. She must have triggered it, because the nearby fog machine hissed to life, a speaker blasted a loud shriek, and a pair of strobe lights flickered on. She stumbled backward, tripped over her own feet, and fell straight into a stack of painted barrels meant for a zombie bunker scene. Security was on her in seconds. We didn't press charges. Again. At this point, Karen had become less of a threat and more of a cautionary tale. The cops who arrived just shook their heads. One officer joked that she should start getting frequent trespasser miles. But the event did something I didn't expect. It reminded me how much energy I had poured into this over the last year. What had started as a spontaneous act of revenge had spiraled into a business, a movement, even a cultural moment. And while I didn't regret it for a second, I realized something had shifted. I wasn't doing it just for Karen anymore. I was doing it because people genuinely loved it. Families, teens, even grandparents came through the attractions not just to be scared, but to laugh and release the stress of their own Karen-like run-ins. I had turned frustration into fun, and now it was something bigger than both of us. A few weeks after that final sabotage attempt, I got a message from a film producer. Not the usual indie horror crew or YouTube documentarian, but a real, funded studio. They wanted to make a dark comedy based on the RV, the neighborhood feud, and everything that followed. They pitched it as a satire of entitlement culture, with Karen as a symbol of unchecked arrogance and me as the reluctant hero-turned-haunter. I met with their team, went over scripts, and even walked them through the original RV. They loved every detail. The spray-painted private property sign, the fake HOA warning labels, and the wall of Karen quotes immortalized in glowing LED letters. We signed a deal. The film was greenlit. But the condition was clear. The real Karen would not receive a dime. Her actions were public, her image already a meme, and the courts had confirmed more than once she had no legal stake in any of this. It was a clean slate for storytelling. She had written herself into infamy. All I had done was hit record. When the trailer dropped months later, it blew up online. The first scene showed a peaceful suburban street, then cut to an RV screeching into a field with a Karen yelling, "This is my right," before the screen went black and the words, "based on a ridiculously true story," appeared. The comments section exploded. People started sharing their own Karen stories, turning the whole thing into a giant cathartic purge of every bad neighbor, overreaching official or entitled stranger they'd ever dealt with. And through it all, the RV tour kept going. We had expanded to 3 units by then. One was themed entirely around HOA horror. One focused on retail Karen moments, like staged grocery store meltdowns and dressing room chaos. And the original RV, the crown jewel, remained untouched, permanently retired from touring and displayed in a private lot-turned-mini museum. Karen was nowhere to be seen during all this. Her last known appearance was a blurry tabloid shot of her in a small town 3 states away, trying to sell handmade essential oils at a local market. Nobody recognized her there, and she kept her head down. Part of me wondered if she had finally learned her lesson, but a bigger part suspected she was simply hiding, licking her wounds, and waiting for attention to shift somewhere else. Either way, I had moved on. The Karen who once tried to turn my lot into her private trailer park was now part of Halloween history. The closing of our seasonal tour that year was massive. Thousands came to the final event. We had costume contests, live bands, even food trucks themed after HOA violations like unapproved barbecue and unauthorized snack stand. The original RV was placed center stage, surrounded by velvet ropes and lit like a movie premiere. I stood beside it and gave a short speech about how the weirdest things in life sometimes lead to the most unexpectedly great outcomes. Then, as a surprise, I activated a brand new animatronic installed just for that night, a Karen figure that popped out of a mailbox yelling, "I pay your salary." The crowd roared with laughter. As the night ended, a kid approached me, no older than 10, wearing a Karen costume with a wig, sunglasses, and a fake megaphone. He looked up at me and said, "Hey mister, is Karen real?" His mom chuckled nervously and said, "She means the one from the show, of course." I knelt down and smiled at the kid. "Oh, she's real all right," I said. "But now she's just a story. And stories don't scare us if we own them." The kid grinned and ran back to her friends, megaphone in hand. That moment stuck with me. Because it was never just about revenge. It was about reclaiming peace in a world full of Karens, whether they show up in real life or just in our head. It was about turning frustration into creativity, turning conflict into comedy, and most of all, about proving that even when someone parks an RV on your property without asking, you can still turn it into the ride of a lifetime. The next morning, I walked the empty field next to my barn, the very spot where this all began. The gravel was clean now, the grass had grown back, and the lot was finally quiet again. No RV. No flamingo. No unsolicited brunch yoga. Just peace. And as I stood there looking out over the land Karen once claimed without asking, I couldn't help but think that she had, in a strange way, given me more than she ever took. Because sometimes, when people try to steal your space, they end up giving you a spotlight. And if you know what to do with it, you don't just take back your land. You take the whole stage. So if you're ever driving down a quiet road and you see a haunted RV glowing under the stars, just remember, it all started with a woman who thought you weren't using it anyway was a valid excuse. And a man who decided to turn that excuse into a legend.